Hello and welcome back to another episode of Cyber Voices, the official podcast of the Australian Information Security Association, otherwise known as ASA. I'm your host, as always, David Willett, and it is my pleasure to have you with us as we explore the diverse voices of the Australian cyber industry. This special edition of Cyber Voices was recorded at CyberCon 2024 and is part of our series from the conference highlighting some of the thought leaders that came together to make CyberCon so special. Well, welcome back once again, Cyber Voices here at CyberCon 2024. I'm joined today by Reece Corbett-Wilkins. Hi, Reece.
Hello, David.
Hi. And we have got Kathy Sundstrom with us from IDcare. Kathy, how you going?
Great. Thanks so much for having me in the booth.
You're very welcome. It's a pretty cool booth, by the way.
I think it's cool.
Yeah, we are an audio podcast, but listeners, we're in the middle of the floor and everyone's looking at us.
No, don't say that.
Which was kind of what we wanted. How are you finding the conference so far? It's day one, end of day one at this point.
I love CyberCon. I've had the privilege of coming. This is my third year now. And it's such a fabulous opportunity to connect with so many different people and to hear incredible talks. So it's a privilege to be here. I always enjoy it.
Now, I was referring to it this morning as Cyber Christmas, I think.
I love that you've moved it to November. I think that was genius because it does feel like a lovely way to end the year.
Absolutely. So you've gotten around to a few talks yourself. What have been some of the highlights?
I went to Colin Howe, who I've been to each year I've been here because I really enjoy his way of presenting.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went to one other, but is it terrible that I can't remember it? There's so many options. That's the hard part. Choosing what to go to and what to miss out on is you can spend a lot of time doing that. So, yeah.
Yeah, and it's so great to absorb yourself in it. I was talking to a student who I know who is out doing volunteering at the moment. They're planning their agenda, and I'm like, do all of it. Like, if this is your first one, go and just go to talk after talk after talk, because especially at that stage of your career, it'll blow your mind.
And the block party. I can't wait for that. That's
yes.
always a highlight.
Yes. You're giving a talk yourself.
Yes.
I believe. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes. So I don't know how much you know about IDcare and the work that we do, but IDcare has been around for 10 years. We're Australia and New Zealand's, this is the tagline, National Identity, Scam and Cyber Support Service. That's the official wording. But really, we are the organization or the not-for-profit that your bank or government or police would tell you to call when something's gone wrong in the online space. So we've been doing that for 10 years. And in 2021, when I first started working at IDcare, we received a couple of phone calls from a community called Ali Karung.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you know where that is.
No.
But if you've ever driven from Alice Springs to Darwin,
right,
sort of near Turn Creek, you turn right. And it's this road that's not really a road. It's got strips of bitumen.
Mm-hmm.
There's no signal between. As soon as you get outside of Alice Springs, your signal just goes flat.
Mm-hmm.
But you get to Ali Karung, which is this beautiful community of less than 400 people, sort of in the center of the country, and you got up to 5 bars. I've been getting quite a lot of calls from Ali Karung. So I called one of them and I spoke to a school principal there. And we started talking about scams impacting this community. And he was saying it just spreads through like wildfire and people are particularly vulnerable in this community. And my background is journalism. And I was like, oh, wow, how does this work? And of course, our founder and managing director, Dr. David Lacey, he loves a good story and understanding how things work.
Mm-hmm.
So we had a closer look at scams impacting people living outside of city areas. And IDcare does monthly reports. And we did a monthly report, which we titled The Great Dividing Range. And it really looked at scams impacting or cybercrime impacting regional and remote communities. The financial losses were higher and people tend to take longer to respond. And then, of course, when they realized something had gone wrong, they were so frustrated by the lack of services in their area. You know, for some of them, they had to travel hundreds of kilometers to get to a bank. And it was just such a different experience. So we compiled this monthly report. And then we thought, okay, this is, interesting. What can we do about it? Now, 2021, mid-COVID, Dave came up with the idea of we would run in-person cyber resilience outreach clinics, CROCs, where we would take awareness sessions to these communities. So in 2021, we launched this program from a pineapple field on the Sunshine Coast where our headquarters are. And then we had a person permanently on the road who's going to be coming tomorrow to talk on his experience of 2 years living on the road, we did 116 postcodes,
Wow.
201 clinics, and reaching over 16,000 people. And he literally went from place to place. We also had vehicles going out of the Sunshine Coast. And we ran these sessions in these communities to talk to people about the basics, right? And we also introduced the Scream at a Scammer booth, where it can be hard. I don't know if you've run cyber sessions, resilience sessions, and you're trying to teach. Often you face an audience and, oh yeah, has anything happened to anybody? And people just look at you. And it takes a while to get people to engage. So we thought, well, what can we do as a conversation starter? And we introduced the Scream at a Scammer booth. I don't know if you've heard about in Iceland. It came from an idea that we saw in Iceland. Iceland has given people the opportunity during COVID to scream in the wilderness. And they have all these loudspeakers set across the wilderness where you can let it out and they play it back there. And we thought, well, people want to vent at scammers. Who doesn't? But it's not safe for them to do it on their phone because there's so many other risks that can happen from there. Let's give them a safe opportunity to do this. So you can vent in a tent in our Scream at a Scammer booth, which was a makeshift portable shower booth. You know, those camping shower booths with a U-Butte microphone. And we took that with us, giving people the opportunity to, we'd start it as a conversation starter. Do you have a message for scammers? And then people would start talking to leave there sometimes abusive. When we share the messages, we have the PG version and the child's only version. And then it's just a conversation starter. So we'll be talking tomorrow because one of our team, as I said, he traveled with his 2 kids who were both aged under 5 when he started the trip, his dog, his wife, and a caravan going from place to place, dodging the lockdowns. And he was locked out of Western Australia, during COVID to deliver these sessions and what we learned. So the 2-year program ended in October last year. And from there, after each session, we'd have a debrief and try and get an assessment of what we learned and the questions that were asked that formed a report. Westpac thankfully sponsored us for those 2 years and we delivered that report to them. And then we started to think, well, has anything changed? And so we reinvestigated the Great Dividing Range, the initial report, to have a look and see if things had got better in these regional remote communities. Fortunately, they haven't. People are still losing large amounts more. $200,000 a day reported to IDcare in investment scams in regional remote communities. And there is so much more likely to give remote access. So we started a little, scratch the tip of the iceberg. We're going back and, tomorrow's talk will be about the experiences, the stories, and, the perceptions, because it's very easy sitting here in a not so lovely air-conditioned, well, it's a lovely booth, but, in an air-conditioned area, where we disconnected maybe from the most of Australia and what that experience is like, the flies, the heat, the dry dirt, having to travel so much distances, the on and off internet connection. And so really trying to understand what the experience that people communicated to us, what that was like for them. So that's what the talk's about.
Amazing. And I imagine that people living in these communities, it's probably not too dissimilar to say like our parents or our grandparents, when someone calls or emails and says, you've got this issue or you owe this money, please take these actions. They're probably in a space, well, this person's called, it must be true.
I know. It's very, very different in those communities because we're so much more connected with our devices. I don't know about you, but I tend to check my bank account every single day. Whereas for them, it's different. It's a different kind of experience. So when somebody, connects with them in that way, and particularly with the phone calls, they're much more likely to engage. So really trying to help them understand how it works and the tricks that scammers use or that criminals use. And also to make them feel, what we deal with a lot at IDcare when people call in, is this feeling of, I was so stupid and, I'm so
Shame
embarrassed.
associated, yeah.
And really helping them understand that they are a target of an organized criminal gang and giving them that, helping to empower them, because we don't want people not to go online. People, I think my colleague Shona and I, who give a lot of the talks, we are slightly older and we're certainly not tech people. We don't have to be to understand the simple steps that make a big, big difference, so that we don't want people to be frightened to go online, because that's not helpful. Online is wonderful. Being able to bank online, shop online, do all those things is great. And we shouldn't be scaring people from this. And sometimes when people, particularly in those communities, hear all the stats, first thing they want to do is throw their device in the bin, and we want to talk to them in person. So we're real people, and empower them that they don't need to throw their device in the bin. They can use it, and they just need to understand what to be aware of.
It's incredible the impact that you've had at the grassroots level, as you say, connecting with people, and some great stats there about how far that's actually been reached into those communities. But you're only touching, as you say, the tip of the iceberg. How do we fix this nationally? How do we get out more? What's the solution? It's
such a good question. So when we looked at, when the end of the 2-year initial CROC program was finished, and we looked at some of the findings from the report, we thought, okay, that's great. We know that in terms of shifting the dial, losses are still incredibly high. What can we do differently? What we've decided to try, and everything is really, in my view, we're all trying. And we should never lose sight of giving things a go. Hopefully, what we think will make a big difference is running these sessions and then developing connections within those communities, champions that continue to provide that personal connection point that people can go to and say, has this happened? They can connect with us and we can be that ongoing channel. I think that'll help with those regional and remote communities where people. The difficulty is we have so much awareness and education online. When you've been scammed on that device,
the last thing you want to do is go back on your computer to work out what to do, right?
Yeah. So we have to increase the value of people knowing they're talking with people. And AI is wonderful. There's so many advancements that are just exciting. And it's really exciting to see the different opportunities at this conference. But ultimately, we relate to people.
Yeah.
Humans relate to humans, and particularly in those communities where they're less connected, where they're connected to the land and their work and their families. And this is just a tool. We need to help them understand that tool to use it effectively.
The other thing I'm picking up on what you're telling me is the power of storytelling as well. And you're a journalist by trade previously, so clearly this is all part of your psyche and toolkit. Talk to us a bit about that. Like, how important is that to actually get those results?
My background is media. I've spent 30 years in different roles within the media. And one thing that you learn when you first start media is people first, right? It's the basics of being able to get people to engage with the story. It's not the statistics. It's you start with what happened to you, and then people go, oh my goodness, how did that happen? And then they take the statistics on board. And that's what's so wonderful about being able to go to these communities and sit down and hear, because sometimes when you're working in the cyberspace, it all just becomes a little bit generic. It just becomes, oh, that's remote access, that's phishing or telephone or whatever. And you lose sight of the psychology and the interaction that got the person to believe it in the first place. And to me, that's what's so interesting. And when you can sit down and have a discussion with a group of people, what we do in our clinics is we always bring it to that community. So we have a rich pool of data from over 10 years, and we can give an assessment of what we know has happened there. And then when you can talk to something that's unique to that postcode, then people can, and stories that we've been able to get from those people living there and share them, they're far more likely to then learn more, in my view. So
you're talking a lot about obviously regional and remote areas as a vulnerable space. Have you kind of looked at the data in other ways? Have you looked at, say, age demographics? Have you looked at wealth demographics? Is there anything else that's behind the stats that could tell a story?
Well, we know with age demographics, every time we go and do a presentation, we say to people, what age group do you think is most vulnerable? And people always say, oh, my parents. And I love myth busting that. That's always how we start, because it's like, actually, you're probably more likely to engage with a criminal than your mum and dad.
Yeah.
Sure, your mum and dad are more likely to lose your inheritance.
The impact and the severity is real,
It's the real reason why I'm educating my mother.
So that's always an interesting way to get people to think about it, because there's a scam for everyone, as our boss likes to say, and then helping them to understand. When we initially ran Croc, it was to regional remote communities only. In our next version that we're about to roll out, we'll also be looking at metropolitan areas and with a specific focus around called communities, because we do know, obviously, that when it comes to those Mandarin scams, they can be particularly vulnerable, and increasing awareness and education and connection with them is something we're really excited about over the next 2 years.
Yeah. I was particularly taken by the Scream at a Scammer initiative, by the way, and slight cheeky question. Do you think that maybe we could look at bringing that to CyberCon?
I think it's a great idea.
Vent in a tent.
Definitely.
You imagine it?
5,000 people in a tent venting.
Yeah. We can attach it to the podcast next year. You can come chat to us and you can go scream at a scammer next door.
I love it. I'm sure we get some interesting messages here.
What is the sort of the science or the psychology behind these people actually going and doing that, though? I find that really interesting.
Yeah, I think initially it was purely as a conversation starter, because when we first did the Crocs, we'd often run them at, markets or community events, and, something like this where there's so many different vendors to look at, and people would see this, this pretty ordinary shower tent with a rustic Scream at a Scammer booth and this U-Butte microphone, because it's all about the mic, right?
Of course.
And go, what's this about? And then we'd say, well, are you sick of getting scam texts, scam calls? Who isn't? And here's your opportunity to leave a message. And what we also looked at doing originally was, obviously, when people contact IDcare, then we asked them, do you have what number did the scammer use or something like that? So we had a list of contact numbers that we understood might belong to criminal organizations. And when I first started at IDcare, we took some of those contact numbers who we knew belonged to criminal organizations, and then we'd phone them, and then we'd play back the screams as a opportunity for the criminals.
Yeah. Feedback loop.
Productive feedback for you. It was interesting to hear. It was interesting to hear how they reacted to that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just people like it. People like to give their view, and we don't want people. I get a little bit frustrated when I see some journalists say, this is clever. I spoke to the scammer and I kept them on the phone, and they record their conversation as a joke, because it encourages others to do the same thing. And you're not dealing with some Mickey Mouse other person. You're dealing with an organized criminal gang. Don't take them on unless you know what you're doing. So you have to do it safely. This gives them that opportunity.
Yeah. And also as well, a message for people who are potentially doing that, maybe need to realize that the person who's calling them is sometimes usually the victim of some form of abuse,
That's
human rights
right.
abuses or trafficking or something like that in a third world country, who is sometimes being forced to do that as well, which is a reality of these scam situations too.
It certainly is, yeah. And that's, something that really recently we've learned a lot more about. And I think it's important to understand how complicated this space is. It's easy to put it black and white, good guys versus bad guys. And sometimes there's a bit of grey involved.
Yeah, definitely.
Spoken to David for a little while about my optimistic hopes that cyber risk is a generational issue, perhaps one that we're feeling the rub at the moment, but in the next 10 years, hopefully, we'll be in a better worldview than we currently are. What do you think?
I'm an optimist, so hope is good. I think what's important when it comes to cyber risk compared to other risks, particularly physical safety risk, is that we don't think that, okay, I've gone and listened to a talk on scams and cybercrime, I don't need to worry about it now. I've put my latest protective measure, or, some people are like, I've got antivirus, I'm safe. We have to stay informed. It's an ever-evolving space, and we need to make sure, as Dave likes to say, my Dave Lacey always calls it a game of whack-a-mole. We block down one area and they pop up somewhere else. So I think we need to treat education as a key and be sure that we teach our family, our friends, and yes, our parents to stay informed and to be interested in it, because it can seem dry and boring. Is my big worry coming into the space, leaving the media where every day is interesting, that I would get bored. I've never been bored because it is an interesting space, and stay up to date with the latest risks. And I think that in the future, I don't think we're ever going to reach a point where we can say, oh, we've got all this technology in place and therefore it's no longer a risk. I think education's going to be a component of it for a long time to come.
Totally agree.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, and all the best with your talk.
I'm a little
at
nervous.
CyberCon. You will be amazing. Glad we gave you a trial run.
And say the warm-up acts.
Yeah. And thank you so much for sharing your voice with us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for coming on. Cheers.
Well, hello there, fellow podcasters. Are you looking to level up your podcast game? Well, let me tell you about This Is a Studio. This Is a Studio is where we record cyber voices each and every single week. They're located at 693 High Street in Pran and Ikla Hawthorne East. They're Melbourne's go-to video podcast studio. Whether you're starting a podcast or taking your podcast to the next level, they've got everything you need: quality equipment, a professional setup, and a team that lives and breathes podcasts. And if you're like us and thinking about going live, these are the folks behind the scenes at events like the AFL Grand Final, Equitina Melbourne 2024, and of course here at CyberCon 2024 as well. Seriously, these guys really know their stuff. So, if you're ready to make your podcast shine, check them out at thisisastudio.com.au. This is a studio where Melbourne's best podcasts come to life. Thank you for listening to another episode of Cyber Voices. Our music is by Sanar Garut, our show artwork is by Studio Quarantine, and we record our show at This Is a Studio in Pran, Melbourne, part of Popplant Productions. Please make sure you follow the show on your podcast platform of choice and leave us a 5-star review. This will help others find the show. Also, please follow the association on LinkedIn and Instagram. If you want to add your voice to our ever-growing chorus of diverse cyber voices, have questions, feedback, or would like to be a sponsor, you can do so by emailing us at cybervoices@asa.org.au. That's cybervoices@aisa.org.au. Are you an ASA member? If not, you should consider joining our network of over 12,000 members across Australia. An ASA membership can open doors, build professional networks, create lifetime friendships, and offer exclusive training, events, and other perks. Become a member today by heading to our website at asa.org.au. That is all for today. I hope you will join us again next time on Cyber Voices.